You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello, world, and welcome to Tales from Hollywoodland, a veritable feast of movies, television, Broadway, showbiz stories, and even a little bit of news and gossip. With Julian Schlossberg, Arthur E. Friedman, and Stephen J. Rubin. Today, we're talking to the host of Harvey Brownstone Interviews, Harvey Brownstone himself. And now, here's Steve.
Welcome, Harvey, to our show.
Thank you, Steve. Hello, Julian and Arthur. Thank you so much. And Mike, thank you so much for having me here.
We're a show business show, and we know that you interview a ton of celebrities, but I'd like you to go back to your early days as a youth and tell me or tell us what your touchstones were. What are some of the things you love to do in the world of entertainment in terms of watching or enjoying? What was your early life like?
Well, in terms of entertainment, I have to tell you that it was very connected to the fact that I was really badly bullied as a kid. I was one of those kids, even though I didn't know what being gay was, I didn't understand any of that. I was pegged from a very early age, like about 7, by the other kids and called a faggot, and they just could see something different in me that I didn't even know myself. And so I was so badly bullied that for me, if I could just get home from school and watch I Love Lucy, that was my safety net. I really believed Lucy Ricardo was my friend, and I just immersed myself in those kinds of shows, The Honeymooners, anything funny, Beverly Hillbillies, all of those sitcoms from the 60s were my security blanket.
Was your family encouraging of watching shows? They didn't put any limits on you?
No, they didn't put any limits. In fact, you remember that Ed Sullivan was on at 8 p.m. on Sunday nights, and that was past my bedtime, but they did allow me to watch Ed Sullivan every Sunday night. That was a big, big thing in our house. And, I just always knew I wanted to be an entertainer. I wanted to be in show business. I knew I had no talent, but I wanted to be in show business very badly. And once I got to be an adolescent, I became a junkie, a talk show junkie. I couldn't get enough of Merv Griffin and Mike Douglas and, Barbara Walters and Rona Barrett and all of these people, Dick Cavett, David Frost. I wanted to be an interviewer because I felt that I could do better than them. I didn't think they asked good enough questions. And that's what I really wanted to do. And I would have gone into being an interviewer, except that when I told my parents I was gay, they were so disappointed. They were so devastated that I knew I had to do something that would be a guarantee of success. And, show business, there's no guarantee. So I switched gears, went into law school, became a lawyer. When that wasn't good enough, then I became a judge. Then they were impressed. And in fact, my mother had her own website, mysonIsAjudge.com. But I tell you, the real fun was after I retired from the bench and I finally started to pursue my passion as an interviewer, really just as a hobby. But it was the talk shows and the comedy shows that really energized me.
Well, you've been doing for the last 3.5 years this very successful podcast. I think it's 435 shows over the last 3.5 years. I mean, as I told you once, I think you should be napping. You should be lying down. That's an awful lot of shows to do. But you think there was any kind of movement from being a judge to an interviewer? After all, you do have to ask some questions as a judge often.
That's such a good question. I got to tell you that I think what distinguishes me as an interviewer from everybody else is that I do have that courtroom experience. I never lost a trial as a lawyer. I don't really interview people. I conduct an examination in chief. That's what I'm really doing. And when I had witnesses on the stand as a lawyer, I interviewed them. I didn't cross-examine them. I interviewed them. And if you could get the confidence of the witness, they would open up to you and say things that they wouldn't normally say because they didn't feel threatened. So I was always an interviewer, even in the courtroom. And I use those skills in my show. Anybody who watches my show will see that I'm not the typical interviewer. Well, poor Julian has been Harvey-ized. So
no, you were, what you did is what few interviewers do. You did your research. And what you did when you knew more about me than I knew about me. And you can't get better than that from when you want to do an interview. So often I've told the guys, I'll go on and they'll say, what's your book about? And, think, well, come on, and my answers become now 300. It's about 350 pages. That's what it's about,
Well, you're nicer than me because when my book came out, when I was a judge, I wrote a book and I did this speaking tour and media tour. And when I got people that said, radio interviewers saying, well, what's your book about? I would say, well, when you figure that out, would you let me know? Because I can't believe, I think that Zoom is great and webcams are great, but just because you can actually launch a YouTube channel and buy a webcam and start your own show doesn't mean you should. And the internet is clogged, particularly YouTube, with so many podcasts hosted by people who don't know the first thing about an interview. It's very frustrating because it makes it hard for people like you guys and Julian on your own solo show and me to get recognized, to get noticed because there's so much junk out there. So I really appreciate what you said because I really do my homework. I really do. I read both your books, Julian, and I studied your career and I tried to come up with questions that I think people would want to know about you. But you have to do your research. You can't cheat.
Harvey, I'm curious to know something, please. You mentioned some great interviewers before. Years ago, one of the great communicators in the history of television, radio, Edward R. Murrow, used to do these person-to-person things, but he wasn't good at it. It was uncomfortable. Every interview I saw him do as a kid, there was something uncomfortable about it. How do you explain that?
I think the key to Edward R. Murrow was, first of all, it was he was doing Zoom before it was even invented. He was going into people's homes. I actually have the box set of the Edward R. Murrow person-to-person show. And you're right, but he got huge stars. He got Marlon Brando. He got Marilyn Monroe. He got people, I remember the one with Jerry Lewis, and you could see he was a bastard. He was horrible to his children. You could tell watching. So I don't think he was all that good. In fact, if you remember, he smoked constantly. All you could see was a cloud of smoke in front of his face. Yeah. Because he was so nervous and so uncomfortable, but it didn't matter because we got to see the stars in their own homes and nobody else did that. But, I had such fun when I got Jerry Lewis's son, Gary, to come on my show. I reminded him of that interview with Edward R. Murrow. And he didn't remember it. And I said, I could see that your dad was so harsh. He was such a disciplinarian. You could tell that you were all scared stiff of him. And it brought back memories to him. That was quite a moment for me to get to talk to him about that.
Yeah. Well, Jerry had a part of him that was monster. It's most people don't know about those things. However, he did have it. And
I think Edward R. Murrow's problem, if you want to say he did, was that he was a terrific newsman. This was not his milieu. He was out of his comfort zone, and he made all of us uncomfortable. He just wasn't doing. He really wasn't really miscast in that show. Totally, in my opinion.
Harvey, what was the toughest interview you've done so far where you really had to pull teeth to get some answers? Because I've interviewed people, and sometimes it's like short little answers, and they just don't want to talk.
It's funny. Most of the time I have the opposite problem, that they don't understand that an interview is a conversation. It's not a monologue. It's not a lecture. But the one person who stands out was Anne Margaret. She's just so shy. She doesn't want to talk about herself. She just doesn't feel comfortable talking about her career. And so, as you guys know, because you're really good at this, you never ask a question that has a yes or a no answer, because that's what you're going to get. So, but with her, when I asked her, well, what was it like working with Elvis? You'd get, he was really great. What you made all of these great movies. I want to talk to you about some of them. She couldn't really, I don't know if she couldn't remember or she just didn't, she chose not to really go into the past. And so that was uncomfortable. And it was a very short interview. We only got 19 minutes of footage we could use. And the other one was Brenda Vaccaro for very different reasons. Brenda can't remember anything.
Oh.
Brenda Vaccaro is a lovely person, but she couldn't remember any of the movies she was in. And every movie I mentioned, she'd say things like, was I in that? Was I any good? That was a bit uncomfortable. And yet somehow I got her to talk. People love that interview, but it was a challenge.
Well, it's interesting when that happens, and you end up being the interviewer and the interviewee. You got to jump in there and start telling stories yourself to keep it going. I'm interested, Harvey, in knowing you served 26 and a half years as a judge. I want to ask you a couple of things. Tell me about how you felt about the movie Kramer versus Kramer.
Well, that was the first family law film that really focused on a contentious custody battle. And we all watched it, of course. I wasn't a judge at the time. That was in the early 80s, I think. I was still a lawyer. And we all watched it and understood the theme of the movie. But of course, as Hollywood is known to do, at the end, the parents decide to do the right thing and it all resolves so nicely. The truth about family law is very different. Very, very different. It's a very toxic place. The people, the divorce rate in this country is at least 50%. And that's just the people that get married. But if you add all the people that live together who don't get married, the separation rate is more like 80%. And of those people, 90% of all those people break up without a lot of conflict. They somehow work it out. They have a separation agreement. They get lawyers. It's not that complicated. But for the 10% that have to go to family court, it's extremely adversarial, very hostile, very toxic. The children are lost. You remember the War of the Roses. There's a very famous line there where the lawyer says, there's no winning in family court. There's only degrees of losing. Well, let me tell you, the biggest losers are the children. And that's why I wrote my book, Tug of War, because I just couldn't stand the fact that people have absolutely no concern for their children when they come to court. I used to do custody trials where the children were never mentioned. I heard about infidelity and bad cooking and interfering in-laws and financial trouble. I never heard about the kids. That's not what they were fighting about at all. They ostensibly are fighting about custody, but they're really fighting each other because they haven't emotionally disengaged. And you have to reinvent yourself from an ex-partner to a co-parent. That's what you have to do in a successful divorce. But the people that would come to court are incapable of doing that, usually because of a personality disorder. And so those movies, Kramer versus Kramer and The Squid and the Whale and all of those movies, they don't really reflect what really happens.
Well, Harvey, I would like to know, and I think our listeners would like to know, that a guy like yourself, judge, lawyer, movies, one of the great genres in movie history are courtroom dramas. 12 Angry Men, as an example, would be one of mine. What are some of your favorite films that are in that courtroom?
Well, 12 Angry Men for sure. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington was another really great. It wasn't really a courtroom drama, but the the pontificating, the advocacy. My favorite was To Kill a Mockingbird. Yeah. That is the reason I wanted to be a lawyer. And I'm so grateful. When I was just appointed to the bench, Gregory Peck was on a tour doing this kind of Q&A thing where he would go to various big cities and they would show some film clips and he'd take questions from the audience. And I got chosen and I got to tell Mr. Peck that he was the reason I became a lawyer and now I'm a judge. And he invited me up on the stage. You know, it was before we had cell phones. There's no selfies, but he gave me a big hug. I'll never forget that. So To Kill a Mockingbird for me was one of the greats. But of course, what was the movie about Darwin?
Oh, Inherit the Wind.
Inherit the Wind is another great one. Love that. You know, but most of these movies, I have to be honest, they're not very realistic.
Well, the one that was seemingly strange from a civilian point of view was the hysterical And Justice for All. Al Pacino going bananas in the courtroom. Was there any accuracy? Because you're in Canada, it's a pretty sedate country, we feel. We unfortunately, we are not so sedate. So how was that film for you?
And Justice for All is pure fiction, pure fantasy. Same with Paper Chase. You know, that wasn't what law school was really all about. Most of those movies do not reflect what really happens. And I have to say that, you know, I was known for being one of the judges with you may find this hard to believe, but I was a touch more animated than most judges. And I wanted to speak to the litigants. It frustrated me terribly in family court that we're making these big decisions about these people and their children, but they never got to speak. It was just the lawyers. And I always thought there was something wrong with that. I want to get to know these people and find out what they're really all about. Because lawyers want to polish everything, and of course, it's their job to present their clients in the best possible light, but it's not very realistic. I remember one lawyer going on and on and on about joint custody. He really wanted joint custody. So I said to the father, the client, tell me what your understanding of joint custody is. He said, well, I never want to see that bitch ever again.
Oh, God.
I said, well, I said to the lawyer, how dare you come here and advocate for joint custody when you haven't even explained to your client what it is? What do you think joint custody is? You have to be able to make decisions together. So, you know, the movies are fun, but they don't reflect what really happens. And for the most part, family court is extremely sad. You're dealing with people who are in pain. They're feeling terribly betrayed. You know, I'll tell you something fun. One year, all of the family judges in our courthouse, which was the biggest courthouse in Toronto, we decided to keep stats for a year on why people are breaking up. What's the number one reason people break up? It was infidelity. 95% of people break up because of infidelity. And it's the man that's being unfaithful most of the time. So, I mean, if they're having affairs with married women, somehow the married women are better at not getting caught, but the men get caught. So one year I decided I'm going to keep track of how did these guys get caught? Cell phones. These guys are so stupid that they get text messages and photos and their wives end up seeing their cell phones. So I'm thinking to myself, my God, if you're going to be stupid enough to get caught, stupid enough to screw around, don't get caught.
Well, we know that the population of the world is filled with different kinds of people. Some are more intelligent than others. I wanted to ask you about how you have this gigantic audience in England. How did you end up a Canadian in England? Did you use the Union Jack to get in? I mean, how did it happen?
Well, I'll tell you. I had when I started, I mean, this was just a hobby. I had no expectation that I would ever be able to make anything of it, really. I just wanted the chance to see if I could interview some famous people. And about a year into it, a publicist in London started sending me some of his clients, British celebrities. And so, I was desperate to get anybody that was famous to come on my show. And after he saw the interviews, he called me and said, I'm a part owner of this cable network in the UK called XPTV1. And we'd like to just air your show. Oh. And I couldn't believe it because it's a YouTube show. I mean, our production values are pretty good. If you've seen the show, my partner, Steve, is a fantastic person on the computer and he does make the show look really good, but it is a YouTube Zoom show. But I said, sure, if you want to put us on TV, go ahead. Well, that took off. And unbeknownst to me, the XPTV1 network, which I thought was just a rinky-dink cable network, turned out to be something really big. And we went from 1 million viewers a week to 3 million. Now we get 10 million viewers a week on television in the UK. The show is on twice a week. And so that's how it happened. It was just, they approached me and I said, sure, because I thought that if we were on television, it would be easier to get big stars to come on the show because I could say, I'm on TV. I'm not just a YouTube show. We have a television show. So that's how it happened.
Well, it's a fantastic story, and it's amazing that occurred. I mean, certainly you ended up outdoing Mike Douglas and Merv Griffin.
Harvey,
Harvey,
explain the popularity of Judge Judy Scheinblum.
Oh, that bitch stole my act. I can't believe, she is such a brave woman. She quit the family court in New York and took a chance on CBS, and basically her persona, which is a very, common sense, Jewish mother kind of approach. She's tough, no nonsense, don't pee on my leg and then tell me it's raining. I was born in the dark, but it wasn't yesterday, all of that stuff. She created a personal brand, but I'll tell you, and every judge will agree with me. Judge Judy single-handedly destroyed the family court system because prior to her, people went to lawyers. Once she became a big star, we suddenly started seeing people coming to court on their own with no legal representation at all. And when I would say to people, listen, I think you need a lawyer. There's rules of procedure. There's rules of evidence. This is complicated. We went to law school 3 years to learn how to do this. This isn't so simple. They would say to me, why should I get a lawyer? Nobody has a lawyer on Judge Judy. It's my story. Why do I have to pay somebody to tell my story? It was suddenly Judge Judy made it okay to get up there and tell your story. But what people don't realize is that Judge Judy's doing small claims court. She's not doing family court. So that was one side effect of Judge Judy. As much as she's very entertaining, she's got great common sense. There are a number of things the public doesn't realize. I know her. I've spoken with her. Number one, those court cases she did were an hour long. They're highly edited for her show. They just put the best parts. You're not seeing the whole thing.
Showbiz.
It's show business. It's entertainment. It's not the real thing. Number two, everybody who goes on her show does have a real dispute. Those are cases taken from the family courts, but they're all paid. Even if you lose the case, you got a free trip to Hollywood and you got $1,500. So, it's not so terrible to lose. It's not the real world. But you got to take your hat off to the woman. She turned adjudication into an entertainment, but it's not realistic. It's not what really happens. If I were to call somebody stupid in a courtroom, I'd be removed from the bench. Or I might be nominated for president.
I'm curious, is it true that attorneys who are given the opportunity to become judges are excited about it, or was there any trepidation on your part going from being a successful attorney to a judge?
Well, in Canada, we're appointed for life. You're not elected. So judges are treated way better in this country than in the United States. And it's really a big honor. It really, really is. So I don't know anybody who would be offered a judicial appointment in Canada and would turn it down unless they're making so much money as a lawyer that they don't want to take a cut in pay. But It's a very prestigious position in Canada because it is a lifetime appointment. I was 38 years old. I was the youngest judge ever appointed in Canada, and I was the first openly gay judge. So did I have trepidation? Well, I never hid the fact that I was gay. I never announced it. I just people just figured it out. And so I was honest about myself. And I remember when I had my interview, because you have to be interviewed to be a judge. And I didn't think I had a chance. Like I figured, what government is going to appoint an openly gay person? So I'll remember this. They put you in front of this panel of lawyers and judges and members of the public, and they make a decision of who they want to recommend, and then the Attorney General appoints you. But I never thought I had a chance. So at one point, this woman says to me, well, there's been 500 people apply for this position. What makes you think you're more qualified than any of them? And I'm thinking, what a stupid question. I haven't seen those people's applications. How do I know? That's your job. So I said very smugly, the difference between me and those 500 people is that I'm going to get the job and they're not. Well, every mouth in the room flew open. Their tongues were on the floor. And I'm thinking to myself, well, now you fucked yourself, but good. You and your big mouth, you don't have a chance. Well, 2 weeks later, I get a call from the Attorney General that I've been appointed to the bench. Well, I couldn't believe it. So at the swearing in ceremony, who do I see there but the chairman of the committee? So I go up to the guy and I said, listen, I have to ask you, I can't believe you guys put my name forward after I said what I said. He said, what you didn't know is that we hated that woman. She asked the most inappropriate questions of every candidate, and you were the only one that ever opened up a mouth. So just to bug her, we put your name on the list. And the Attorney General picked you.
Harvey,
now, that's what you call bashert, destiny.
That's right. What I'm interested in knowing is that in our country, supposedly, judges have to keep their mouth shut. Not supposed to go out in public. You're clearly a gregarious man who can speak. Were you able to talk? Is Canada okay about a justice going out and giving interviews?
No. And I was the first. Judges cannot speak about pending litigation. They can't speak about any issues that are before the court that they might have to adjudicate on. They certainly cannot talk about anything political. But after I was a judge about 12 years and I saw what was going on in family court, the carnage, the destruction, how every couple came in there waging World War III without any concern for their children and without any understanding of what a judge's job is. We're not in the vengeance business. We're there to determine what's in the best interest of children. I couldn't stand it anymore. And I wrote a book. And I went to a Supreme Court justice who I had clerked for when I was in law school. And I asked her to read this book and tell me whether she thinks I should publish it. She said, go ahead. There's nothing in this book that's political. There's nothing in this book that it compromises your impartiality. Go for it. And if there's a problem, I'll get the Supreme Court to back you. So I did it. Well, when the book came out, the media went wild because no judge in Canada had ever written a book like this for the public that told the truth about what really goes on in family court. And I started going all over the place in the media. Suddenly, I'm being invited on every radio show. And the book became a bestseller. So, of course, when that happens, your publisher, they sent me to the opening of a garage door. They would do anything to, I think I went to the opening of an envelope at one point. So
the opening of an envelope. Let me write that down.
So the Chief Justice, of course, said nothing until the media started praising the book. Then all of a sudden, the Chief Justice was behind me. So they kind of let you hang out to dry. But when they saw which way the wind was blowing, that the media loved this, that I was actually good at media interviews, that I didn't put my foot in my mouth, that I was careful about what I said, then they were all behind me. And I thought it would open the floodgates. I really thought other judges would have the guts to then speak out, because I don't believe judges are just adjudicators. I think we're public educators. We can give you a lot of information about the justice system. We can't give you legal advice about your case, but we can give you a lot of credible information about the justice system. And so much so that I ended up having a TV show. While I was a judge, I had for 2 seasons, I had a talk show in Canada. I was the only judge to ever do it, but I brought on experts who came and talked about parenting, the best interests of children, separation, divorce, child support. And we were a huge success. But after 2 seasons, the network wanted more Harvey and less Judge Brownstone. And I couldn't
Marty,
give them that.
I sit here and I'm just an out loud thought, wondering, although we try to avoid politics for every good reason, what must a guy like yourself think of what's going on in the U.S. Supreme Court? Wow. We should probably pass on the question. I'm just, as I say, it's an out loud thought, and I'm wondering, I think I know what.
I was going to ask something about that. In fact, it's funny because you mentioned that in Canada, judges are appointed for life, as they are on the U.S. Supreme Court. Now there's been a movement to get judges not to be appointed for life, that they would have to be reelected. What's your feeling about that? Do you think that's an impossible situation?
I think one of the most important values in a democratic society is an independent judiciary. They have to be able to decide what's right in accordance with the law, not what's going to get them reappointed or elected. Judges in the United States, especially those that are elected, are not real judges, in my opinion. They are politicians. That's not the society I live in. It's not the culture I come from. In terms of the Supreme Court, I think that the jurisprudence that has come out of that court, especially with the 3 most recent appointments, is a disappointment. I'll leave it at that. I don't believe that the best legal minds in the country are being attracted to that job. They're not getting appointed. I don't believe that the public confidence in a justice system will survive if the decision-making does not reflect the realities of the world. And it's not just abortion. I think gun control. Every civilized country in the world has serious gun control. The fact that highly educated legal minds cannot interpret the Second Amendment in a way that would still allow the banning of automatic weapons is mind-boggling. And although Canada and the United States are almost indistinguishable, I mean, if you go to a mall here, it looks exactly like a mall in the States. We have the same stores as you. We watch the same TV shows as you. We go to all the same fast food restaurants as you. But the 2 big differences really in our country, 3, I guess. One is abortion on demand has been that way for decades. Number 2, healthcare. Healthcare here is free. It's not a political issue. It's a human right. Everybody gets free healthcare. That's just the way it is. And number 3, gun control. The fact that there's a country that has witnessed so much destruction and the killing of children, and people can't figure out that, yes, it's true that mentally ill people are perpetrating these offenses, but there's no shortage of mentally ill people in every other country as well, but they don't have access to guns. They can't do what mentally ill people can do in the States if they get their hands on guns. And so I think really that these aspects of legal decisions in the United States are mind-boggling for people outside the States. And I don't think Americans really get it. So many Americans don't know how they are perceived outside of the United States. And they just can't understand. We can't understand how Americans can't see that gun control is an absolute must, because those guns that people have today were not contemplated when the Constitution was written. And healthcare, that's just so obvious. It's just so obvious that everybody needs it. So these are things that make a big difference between Canada and the United States. But we do love America. If Canada were attacked, the only country that would come to our defense are you guys. We know that. We are your strongest trading partner. We have the longest peaceful border in the world. We love America. We just want what's best for you.
And you had Garth Drabinsky.
Well, don't hold that against me.
Also, I want to ask you a question, if I can, Harvey.
Go ahead.
I want to ask you about Deborah Presley Brando. I had no idea that Elvis Presley had a daughter. I had no idea the daughter had married Brando's son. Where did you find out about this woman? And you realize that you have over 52,000 people have listened to that interview. That's
way more than that. Over 10 million people have listened to that interview on our website. Unfortunately, YouTube will not give us credit for any viewing that happens from the website because they don't want to pay us. So it's been over 10 million views. How did I find out about Deborah? Her publicist sent me the book. And I couldn't believe it. I thought this was a crackpot until I went into the court records in Tennessee, and I found out that there was a court of appeal order that allowed her to claim legally that she is his daughter. There was enough evidence that she won. She did not get any money from the estate because Elvis's will said that he left his money to his legal issue. And the interpretation of legal issue by the court was a child born in marriage. And that was Lisa Marie. And since this girl was a biological daughter, but not born in marriage, she got nothing. And, I've had a lot of pushback from that interview. People don't believe her, but you know what? I'm not there to pass judgment. I'm there to get her to tell her story. Her book is very fascinating because of the way she found out that she's Elvis's daughter. And I happen to believe her because Elvis's cousin, who was with him all the time in those early years, this is before he was famous, confirmed it that he dated this girl's mother for quite a while. I mean, Elvis was pretty hot. You can't really think that he only had one child.
No. It's true. He never played Canada, did he?
No, because he couldn't leave the United States, because if he did, Colonel Parker would have to go with him and he'd never get back in the States.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
So one of the problems we're having in the U.S. these days, to change the subject, is there's not a lot of movies to see that really are other than kind of teen superhero science fiction epics. Hollywood seems to be obsessed with franchise movies. It's a big cash play. They see the value of reaching the young audiences. I'm curious, do you go to the movies much?
I watch them on TV at home. I don't go to the theaters anymore, but I do watch them at home. There's not a whole lot of movies that are of any interest anymore, certainly to people over 50. I think that's why YouTube has become so big. And Julian asked, well, how do you have this big audience in the UK? Well, it's not just the UK. I think that because of the pandemic, people discovered YouTube. They were locked in their homes for so long, and they discovered entertainment, especially our generation, people 55 up, found that there was entertainment on YouTube. And then, of course, there's all those miniseries now on Netflix and Amazon Prime that they've replaced movies for a lot of us.
Harvey, did you go to the movies before COVID? Were you a theater goer?
Yeah, well, I love live theater. Yeah. I would go to New York and I loved going to New York and seeing all the Broadway shows. Oh my God, I love Broadway.
Well, what about movies, movie theaters, complexes?
I went to movie theaters decreasingly because I found there weren't a lot of movies that are of great interest. I think the last movie I saw in a theater was Oppenheimer.
Right. That's what everybody says. It was
what
Oppenheimer
are some of your favorite
and Barbie.
Movies, Harvey? What are some of your favorite movies, irrespective of law or what have you? What are your favorite movies?
Oh, my all-time favorite movie is Judy Garland in A Star is Born.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
I'm really fascinated by the fact that even when you attain great success, there's a price to pay. In her case, she loses, the James Mason character, her husband. He can't handle her success. And I really, that resonated with me because, the thing about being bullied, which was really the hallmark of my youth, but it didn't really go away. When I was like, if you're gay in the 70s and 80s, you had to be 3 times better than everybody else. And so that's just the way it was. If you were going to be considered equal, you had to be 3 times better than everybody else in order to just be considered equal. So I love those movies that dealt with the underdog or dealt with success and what happens to you when you attain success, because I was driven. The greatest gift your parents can give you is rejection. Let me tell you. because it makes you an overachiever. It makes you very driven, very ambitious. And that was me. So any movie that dealt with the consequences of success, I was totally into.
Some of them are what? Some other movies like that.
Well, actually, before you do, let me ask a quick question, or at least make a little point. I recently saw for the first time Grace Kelly in The Country Girl, which is a very, very fondly remembered performance. And I didn't realize that she beat Judy Garland out for the Oscar that year for Best Actress, one of the great robberies in Oscar history.
It certainly was. It was right up there with, wow, there's been a few, but I'll tell you that was a heartbreak. That was certainly a heartbreak. At the moment, I can't think of the ones that I'm trying to that are coming, that should be coming to mind as great movies. But
well, you did mention To Kill a Mockingbird, and that is always going to be a great movie. I'm interested in knowing. I've studied your podcast, and in it, it's so interesting to me how many of the people seem to gravitate towards the sons and daughters of famous people. One would think that it would be they'd want to see the famous person if they're alive, but they seem, in your case, to go big time in that. Is that something you kind of planned or just evolved?
No, that was something I planned. I mean, if the legendary stars are dead, the closest you're going to get to them are their children. And I told you what Lucille Ball meant to me growing up. So the number one person I wanted was Lucy Arnaz. I wanted her on my show desperately to tell her what her mother meant to me. It was very therapeutic. And a lot of them are easy to get. Dean Martin's daughter is easy to get. I think I saw her at the opening of that envelope. But anyway, she was there. And then I started becoming known for the person that could interview children of stars, children who are very protective of their parents' legacies, who are very careful about how their parents are presented. They knew that I had great respect. So we got Errol Flynn's daughter to come on, who she never gives interview, Rory Flynn. And we got Hedy Lamar's son, Anthony Loder, who's now passed away. He gave me his last interview. He knew he was dying. We get people, we got Audrey Hepburn's son. He's very reluctant to come and speak. But if you can do a few interviews and show these people that you're a big fan, that you're very respectful, that you want to honor their legacy and their body of work, their careers, they'll come on your show. And the public loves that. They love, oh my God, we had Roy Rogers' daughter, we had Peggy Lee's, we've had relatives from so many. We had Boris Karloff's daughter came on, dozens and dozens of children.
Harvey, that Frank Sinatra said the guy who taught him most about acting was Boris Karloff.
Oh, I didn't know that. But we got Frank Sinatra's daughter, Tina, came on the show.
Yeah.
And she's become a very good friend. She was a real pleasure. These children of these stars have a real story to tell. Gary Lewis, that interview has had, I don't know how many millions of views, because he was so raw. He was so damaged. And so was Hedy Lamar's son.
It is said that there's a specialty in shrinks for celebrity kids.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting because we, on the outside, we think that these children are living such a glamorous life and we envy them. I mean, I went to bed every day as a kid believing that I was little Ricky, that one day my real parents, Lucy and Desi, would come and get me. That there was a mistake at the hospital. I know that they're my real parents. They're going to come and rescue me from this place. And then you find out that it's not so great. And when someone like Lucille Ball, and I'm sorry to say this, I'm sorry, but damn it all, it's the truth. When people like Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz have the audacity to name their children after themselves, what are they thinking? Don't you think it's hard enough being the child of Lucille Ball, especially if you want to go into show business yourself? Now your name is Lucy too? It's just not fair. There's a whole psychology, there's a whole pathology about what celebrities do to their kids that I find really fascinating. You want to know who's coming on next week?
Yeah.
The daughter of John Garfield.
Oh,
Julie.
I've met her.
Julie.
I've met
And
her.
you know
Julie.
who else I really was fascinating? When the movie Maestro came out, starring Bradley Cooper about Leonard Bernstein, I got his daughter, Jamie Bernstein. She came on my show to talk about her dad. And I, as a gay man, was fascinated by this life that he lived and what it must have been like to be the child of a man who's really betrayed his wife pretty significantly. Let's be honest. And she really opened up her heart. So I have to say, Julian, I love interviewing the children of stars. I love it. I want to dig deep and find out what's in their heart and what are there conflicting emotions they feel when they talk about their parents, both publicly and the private person. It's
Harvey,
fascinating.
I'll give you one. I'll give you one. Interesting. I will not mention the names for personal reasons, but son of a very famous mother and father. Interesting. So in asking, what's that like? You know, when you're a kid, 7 years old, they go to a restaurant, big time restaurant in LA. And when normally a kid is a cute kid, you know, everybody's looking at the kid, the mother and father, everybody's after and the kid standing on the side alone, you know, watching this. And that so affected him that he still mentions it. But so there's that. You're not you're the main thing in most situations when you're with your mom and dad, but then you find out that you're sitting there and there's nobody even looking at you. So
Harvey, one of the big stories in Los Angeles right now is the Menendez case. You know, these two murderers who killed their parents with a shotgun are now being considered for the first time for parole. And there's a big outcry from their family. I mean, 25 family members got in front of a judge and said, we'd like them released. I'm curious, from going back into your legal career, what do you think about a case like this? I mean, they've served 35 years of their sentence or something like that. I'm just curious what you think.
I'm going to tell you something that was told to me and my fellow judges when we went to an education program very early on. There was a panel of very high-level psychologists and psychiatrists there. When children don't love their parents, it's always the parents' fault. I almost fainted. I couldn't believe it because, you know, my parents kicked me out and I lived on welfare for 5 years trying to get through school and law school just because I was gay. But I never thought of killing them. But I was so taken aback by that. And it's always stuck with me. And in my 26 years as a judge, I did see cases. I had cases where a child murdered a parent. I had two. And I have certainly seen cases where children have been very cruel to their parents. Maybe not violent, but certainly emotionally cruel, financially cruel, and completely heartless. In every single case, you will find that the parent caused it. We are not born to hate our parents. We are constitutionally created to love our parents. I had children in my court that were deeply abused by their parents, and they still wanted to go home. They still loved their parents. They wanted to go back. Kids that were sexually abused and emotionally abused. I had kids whose parents did horrible things. They all wanted to go home. They still wanted to be with their parents. So when you see a Menendez situation, look, I watched the miniseries, but that's the Ryan Murphy take on it. My gut tells me that they were abused by their father, and I think they should be paroled.
It seems to be the prevailing wind right now, too. They will be leaving prison. I think in his last moments as the district attorney of Los Angeles, he's going to be ousted in an election. Gascon is probably going to free them.
Well, if you look at the second trial, because the first trial was a hung jury, the jury could not decide. The second trial, they were convicted because the judge, who was fed up, decided not to allow the evidence of the abuse. Well, when you took that away from the jury, of course they convicted, but the jury didn't get the same evidence that the first jury got in the first trial. That to me was a serious miscarriage of justice. And I don't believe they would have been convicted had the jury had all the evidence. It's clear. It's clear. I'm not saying that this was an appropriate way to deal with what their parents did to them. I'm not saying it was a justifiable double homicide at all. But I do not believe that their sentence reflected the appropriate degree of punishment given the circumstances. These guys are not a danger to the public. They're not going to go out and kill anybody else. This was a very specific situation that resulted from years of traumatic abuse. That's my gut.
Harvey, on a separate topic, but I want to go back to where you were earlier on. When did this bullying thing that you went through, when did that let up? When in your life did that start going away?
That's an interesting question, because when I became very well known as a judge, after I wrote the book and then I ended up on TV and I did all this media, a lot of professional jealousy started to surround me, and the bullying came back, and they didn't like. My colleagues didn't like the fact that Harvey was becoming so popular and becoming a media personality. And I would have, colleagues saying things like, look, you got to decide. You want to be a star or you want to be a judge? You can't be both. Even though, I never missed a day of work. My caseload was the same as theirs. I didn't cut corners in my job. But so I would say that the bullying was a constant, pretty much a constant. I was one of those.
Right through your teens before you became famous?
In my teens, no, because once you become a teenager, the boys that were bullying me, their hormones kicked in and they were more interested in girls than in bothering me. Besides, if you're bullied a lot as a kid, you develop coping mechanisms. You learn to be funny. If they're laughing at you, then they won't beat you up. And of course, doing their homework and giving them your lunch money is always a good technique as well. But, you develop ways of dealing with it. And I think one of my ways was definitely humor. And, we all have to find a way to create a kind of a likability, a persona in our adult lives in order to make people like you and want to be around you. And that's a lesson you learn from bullying. So it did let up. It certainly let up. When I became a judge and I became famous as a judge, then it came back. But I'll tell you something. Success is the best revenge.
Always.
When I left my job as a judge, the other judges thought I was nuts. I was 65 years old. Most judges stay right to the end. They never want to leave. They love the job. And I had done it 26 years. I was 65 years old. I was entitled to a full pension. I had enough. How many people can I send to jail? How much polyester can I look at? So, not to mention that robe, it's not flattering at all. So
does it have pockets?
When I said that I was leaving the judiciary to host a show on YouTube, they all thought I was completely out of my mind. Like, what do you mean you think you're going to be Dick Cavett? What is wrong with you? Well, when the show got really big and we started to show up on all these best of lists, I'm telling you, success is the best revenge.
Always.
So I was asked this question the other day. I was being interviewed. I'll have to ask you it. If they do the Harvey Brownstone story someday, Hollywood takes on your story, who would you like to have play you?
Julian Schlossberg. First of all,
I'll shave. I will shave.
He's got a smile that'll light up a room. He's got so much charisma and likability that he's off the charts. And the guy is smart. Like, he's really smart.
And you are a delightful guest, Harvey. I got to tell you something. I recently read, because of Julian, he referred me to the autobiography by
William Goldman.
Not William Goldman.
Marty Short.
Marty Short, who was a landsman of Harvey's. Comes from Canada, around Hamilton, I believe. And he could play you and be gangbusters doing it. He'd be great.
Well, I'm sticking with Julian. I think he's the guy. He's the guy with the charisma. He's the star. But you know what? I think that in life, if you can be lucky enough to reinvent yourself and find out what you're really good at and do it, then the universe will unfold in a way that will support you. And I think that this whole YouTube thing, if I've learned anything, it's that if you just concentrate on doing a good job and delivering really great interviews, people will find you. They just find you. And so that's what I do. That's how I live my life. Nobody's going to make the Harvey Brownstone story, but I think that for the people that enjoy an in-depth interview with a celebrity they've always wanted to get to know, I think they'll like my show.
I couldn't agree with you more. What's your favorite Broadway musical, Harvey?
Oh, now this will be a huge shock. La Cage aux Folles.
Are you kidding? Fantastic.
So Julian just got Woody Allen recently to sit down with him, and it's a big get. Harvey, do you have somebody at the top of your list that you'd like to interview that has been a bit of a challenge?
Oh, my God. Julian's interview with Woody Allen, not to mention Martin Sheen, Matthew Broderick, Marlo Thomas, Alan Alda, Elaine May. Julian is at the top of the mountain when it comes to getting the biggest names. And Julian has the gift I don't have. I have to rely on a very scripted presentation where I've got all my facts in front of me. Julian is a conversationalist. He gets them to open up. I enjoyed that interview with Woody Allen so much and learned so much. Who do I want? Well, I'd really love Barbra Streisand. I'd love Meryl Streep. I'd like Robert De Niro. If I could bring somebody back from the dead, it would be Princess Diana. I really, really feel that she never got a proper interview, even though we had her best friend on the show who wrote a fascinating book about her. He was her vocal coach, and he really gave a great interview about who she was. And it was almost like having her there, but I would love her. But you know, that the idea, most of these celebrities have their bullet point answers. They're so used to answering questions about their career. There's really, you have to pierce the veil. You have to get below the veneer and ask them something that takes them aback, and then they will really open up. And I've had so many.
You know what I'd love, and I think zillions of people would love. Not possible, of course. Under the heading of "What if?" What if a great interviewer could be sitting there? They could bring back Abraham Lincoln as an example and say, "Look around, tell us what you think." JFK.
I had the idea for a while, Arthur, of doing celebrity roasts, but instead of doing the typical Milton Berle type things, historical roasts. Like, for instance, Moses never got a roast. Can you imagine who would be on his panel? You would have Pharaoh. You would have God. The Bush would be there. I mean, it could be fun.
That's kind of it. You know.
Yeah, I wish we could bring them back. You know, I wish we could bring them back, because when you do watch people like William R. Murrow, you realize he didn't do a very good job. There's so many more things that should have been asked that never was, and so frustrating.
Come to the end of our show. You are beyond wonderful, Harvey. You are the perfect interview subject because there's no dead space. You have answers for everything, which makes you the ideal subject.
That's why you're going to be our fourth interviewer.
You don't need me. You guys have a winning team. I enjoyed every minute. I can't thank you enough for wanting me to come and chat with you on your show. I appreciate it so much. Thank you, guys. You're wonderful.
You're great too, Harvey. A lot of fun. This was true.
Why aren't you running for president?
Well, you know something, if I wanted to go into politics when I was younger, but I was afraid because I was gay. I didn't think I had a chance, you know.
Well, you would now.
Yeah, and my name is easier to pronounce than Buttigieg.
Yes.
We're going to hand it over to our wonderful producer host, Michael. Take us away, Mike.
Thank you, my friend. I appreciate it. Harvey, thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate you.
I loved it. Thank you again for having me.
You've reached the end of this episode of the Tales from Hollywoodland podcast. Always remember, we couldn't do this without you. We want to hear from you, so please write us anytime at talesfromhollywoodland@gmail.com. Remember, you could find us wherever fine podcasts are found, and now you could even find us up on YouTube. If you made it this far into the episode, why not subscribe and give us a thumbs up? Or if you're listening to us, why not give us 5 stars? If you're into social media, please check us out on Instagram and Facebook. Before we get out of here, let's check with the guys and see what's happening this week on their podcast. Julian, who are you talking to this week?
Oh, the director John Badham. He directed Saturday Night Fever and Short Circuit and War Games and so many films. But he started in The Mailroom. It's a great Horatio Alger story. A man from the mailroom goes to casting, goes to television, and then ends up a top director in film. So he's terrific. John Badham, I met him on Saturday Night Fever, and we became friends.
That is awesome. Steve, what's cooking over on Saturday Night at the Movies?
Our next guest is Tom Schulman, the screenwriter of the Dead Poets Society, who also wrote What About Bob and Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. And we get into a wonderful conversation about those films. I'm currently in Hawaii on vacation on the island of Maui, so I am taking a few days off, but I'll be back in it this following week.
Wonderful, wonderful. Arthur, what's coming up next week on our podcast?
On Tales from Hollywoodland, next week we are going to be discussing the most underrated movies of all time. And there are so many out there that so many people don't know about. Little movies like Operation Madball or Patterns or Odds Against Tomorrow. There are so many. So that's our key subject, and we'll be looking forward to doing it.
Wonderful, wonderful. On behalf of Steve, Arthur, and Julian, thanks again for listening. This is your producer and announcer, Mike Faber. We will see you here next time on Tales from Hollywoodland. Your Hollywood adventure starts right here.
For over 200 episodes, the 42 Cast has brought you interviews, topics, and reviews that are unequaled anywhere on the internet. And that's not going to change. That's right, if you want to listen to a bunch of geeks talk about a random geeky topic and have a lot of fun doing so, then the 42 Cast is the show for you. It's your ultimate answer to fandom, geekiness, and everything. You can only find all this awesome as part of the ESO Network.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.